Hi, it's Rigger. This is Your Right, and it's episode 11 of Ice Queendom. We're getting right down to the nitty gritty. So, we're gonna dive right in, but before I do, real quick, I just wanted to mention, more people are probably going to see this video than have seen my update video, so at the end of this video, when the links to other videos that I've done come up and pop up, the top one will be a link to an update video about this channel. If you haven't seen it yet, please give it a watch. That video will explain what we're going to do between here and Volume 9, as well as some other things happening on the channel. Don't worry, nothing scary, but do check it out, let me know your thoughts, and yeah, hopefully we'll start seeing some of the things I talk about there happen very, very soon. But for now, it is episode 11, and this is basically our finale episode. It seems like we might be doing a wrap-up episode in 12, because we get through basically the whole climax here. So, let's dive in and see how they did it. Starting off, the imagery is way cooler than last episode. Last episode was definitely the dip, definitely the bottom of the animation. There's a good chance, actually, that the next episode is pretty bottom of the barrel, but it seems like all the fights are done, so it shouldn't matter. If they're out of time, out of money. And I saw a lot of people saying it's more out of time because the pandemic had a big impact on production. And, whatever the case, the point being, I think last episode was our real struggle because they had fights to do with not enough resources to do it. And I think they're done now. So even if they're out of animation to use, basically, if next episode is cheaper, it's fine. Because we open up on everything's on fire, everything's in purple flames, it's apocalyptic, it's cool, it looks much better than last episode's version of this. And yeah, we have more of the same, but we start seeing the results of everything. So Negative Blake is forcing Weiss to have breakthroughs because it's so confronting to Weiss that real Weiss is actually sort of breaking through a bit and remembering who she is. It sort of lights her rebellious side and her feelings of duty to correct the mistakes of the SDC as Negative Blake keeps throwing all those mistakes in her face and talking about all the horrible things the SDC has done and all the horrible things humanity has done, which again forces Weiss to be like, I'm trying to fix those things, and it starts pulling her through. And yeah, we get to the point where Negative Weiss can actually finally, quote unquote, see some of the vines, but they're the vines on Blake. Sees that Blake is possessed without realizing that she is herself, and starts to fight and tries to find a way to have real Blake return to her, which is an interesting part of how this whole dynamic works, that despite being Negative Weiss, she still wants her friends and recognizes when they're not themselves. So this is a cool way to get to this. I'm quite a fan of this resolution, honestly. It's here where we get our tease. We cut over to RWBY fighting the Grimm and remembers the conversation with Weiss. Again, there's a reason her gun is backwards, and lots of people have put in the comments their theory as to why, and none of us were correct. And we haven't got there yet. I saw lots of people saying, oh, it's this, and they moved past it. No, well, it seems like it wasn't. It was building to this moment, which is what I thought. And yeah, it turns out to make sense-ish, so yeah, that's alright. But we only get a tease of it. What we do next is we jump all the way over back to Yang. And now, again, Yang being on the bike, it's still not great, but it's a lot better than last episode, so that's something. She's still fighting the giant Nicholas statue. And it's here we get something interesting. For what I think is the first time, I'm pretty sure, in this animation at least, we see Yang's eyes go red. And there's a few things here. One is, in this animation style, it doesn't look that great. They look too big and round and red. It's not like a problem when I say they don't really look bad, but it's the kind of thing where I think Emerald's red eyes would look great, because that's just her normal look. But here is a representation of Yang's fury and anger. I think her expression perhaps didn't match, or there's just too much red and it doesn't really work. Either way, it's not very intimidating. However, this also ties into the triggering of her semblance. This is worth talking about in its own sort of way. Also, do correct me if I'm wrong. Have we seen the red eyes before? I don't think we have. But either way, it seems like this is the first time, and they seem to trigger with her semblance. And it's one of those weird things where it answers the question of can others use their semblance in the dream, because Weiss wouldn't know her semblance yet unless something's changed off screen. And it seems like yes, but presumably that makes sense because it's actual Yang tapped into Weiss's mind, so she knows herself and can use her own semblance, which will come into play with RWBY's ability later, so that all makes sense. I don't have a problem with that. But also, if this is the first time her eyes go red, are we conflating the two things of her eyes going red and her semblance triggering? Because it's one of those things that they do happen at the same time a lot, but they aren't actually tied to each other. But also, I kind of am annoyed at that, because it's been a thing through actual RWBY that it doesn't actually tie to her semblance, but I kind of wish it just did, because it's one of those little details that really doesn't matter and confuses people. Like, her eyes trigger whenever she gets mad, and she's more likely to use her semblance when she's mad, so oftentimes when her eyes go, it's actually a trigger for her semblance, but not every time her eyes are red, she's using her semblance, and people get caught up on it. But anyway, I was just curious if the overseas studio made that mistake, which is fair enough to make, or if it's just perfectly fine. I don't know, I'm getting lost in the weeds here. I just thought it was interesting. I'm not going to get an answer. But either way, she uses her semblance. She basically recreates the punch that she will later do on the mech piloted by Roman, and punches out one of the arms of Nicholas' statue, and continues to drive basically vertically up another arm, which is fine. It's all dream stuff. She then loads up basically a Buster Cannon shot from the back of Bumblebee, which I don't think she can do, but that doesn't matter again. We're in a dream. It doesn't matter. She's already basically driving vertically, so, you know, I'm not questioning that. It was just a cool moment. And we are in basically the climax action episode, so time to get in all your cool moments, and this was one of them. So she loads up all those shots and punches the shots off into Nicholas's eye and drives straight into the head of the statue, and inside the head of the statue seems to be a recreation of the Schnee household, the courtyard more specifically. And inside that seems to be locked away a memory, a little untouched memory that isn't polluted by the nightmare, just a real memory from Weiss's past of her speaking with Nicholas, which is really cool. You know, this may sound silly, but I actually couldn't remember if we had confirmation if they were alive at the same time, or if, because Weiss wasn't the eldest, if Nicholas had passed away before she was born, but it seems like they were. And I didn't know if Weiss was just holding up his ideals that she heard about and learned about, or if she actually spoke to him. I always thought perhaps she probably did speak to him, but I just wasn't really sure. The Weiss talking to him is pretty young, and presumably, if we're doing timeline, he would have to, let's just presume he would have to have passed away before she was 10, because her turning 10 is a big turning point in her life when Jacques turned on her mother, or at least opened up and said the truth to her mother. And I would have presumed Nicholas wasn't alive for that. Not that he could have done anything about it, but it just would make sense that those sort of things would be hidden until he was gone. Meaning Nicholas was towards the end of his life when we saw him. I'll tell you what, he looked good for being near the end of his life. In fact, he looks good in general. Say what you want about Nicholas. His body may have been tired and giving out on him when he retired, but he didn't, you know, show it. But it's here where we get the conversation that seems to have stuck in Weiss's mind, that perhaps leads to her feelings of duty. And it's little Weiss asking Nicholas about his role, about the people treating him like a king, in building what could be considered his castle, this big Schnee manor. And of course, good guy Nicholas, because he is the good guy, explains that he finds his worth in serving others, not ruling them. He tells her she may need to go on a journey of her own one day, just like he had gone on one for himself when he started things. And until that time, this castle he had built would protect her. But eventually, after that, she herself would become a castle to protect others. A lovely sentiment from Handsome Santa. But we gotta keep things moving, so then the world breaks and they fall through the floor as the statue of Nicholas crumbles and explodes. Oh well, good thing they aren't real. Off to the side through this whole finale, we do get little cuts over to what Jaune is doing, where the blade he had touched the ankle of the Jacques statue and it took off like the armor plating on the leg, and now Jaune is still struggling to fight the golem statue thing because he's having so much trouble wielding his weapon, which is the only real effective weapon against this thing. But in a cool little reference to perhaps people's most hated episodes, but still a reference to the actual series, we get a moment reminiscent of the first time where Pyrrha assisted Jaune in fighting Grimm. Instead, it's her and the little Weisses, specifically more the little Weisses using their semblance instead of Pyrrha using hers, to help Jaune and guide Jaune to hit the Jacques statue, which completely destroys its controlling coating and frees the Jacques inside, who will then explode. she is directing the little Weisses and they're following her instruction with their semblance. So it is Pyrrha assisting Jaune, but she's doing it by directing the Weisses who are resisting Jaune. But that's Jaune's battle complete. The Jacques statue explodes, disappears from the boardroom even, and he's done. Moving on. Afterwards, Pyrrha is just standing around for a moment looking fine, because why not? Although I will have to say, she is by far the biggest letdown in this whole thing. For me personally, I just wanted to see what a dream version of Pyrrha would fight like, and the answer is she kinda didn't. She took shots with a little sword and looked cute, but that's about it. But she looks real good standing here. And speaking of looking fine, and I obviously have been watching these episodes because I've reviewed them all, but it actually took me seeing fan art to really take in that this is actually what the design is. Blake just went for the full underwear look, huh? I mean, alright, you're not gonna hear me complaining about it, just, ma'am, that is certainly a choice and a half. Everyone was kicking up a fuss about the whole Adam influence on this outfit, where I'll admit the thing that caught me off guard about it is those thighs. Jeez, I just didn't realize that's what it looked like until we got like a wider camera angle like this, but moving on. But that is just more clashing and fighting. Finally we get back to RWBY, and here we get to the culmination of that whole little subplot. RWBY concludes that all the vines she's endlessly slicing aren't really the real Grimm, it's hiding here somewhere. And she remembers Weiss's words that the Grimm hide in the shadow of those who are facing it. Finally revealing the trick, RWBY realizes it's because the blade on Present Rose faces one way, but the barrel is facing the other, meaning she should shoot behind her. And she does, she turns and shoots into her own shadow, which releases her Grimm, the little one that was sort of, shadowing her, and kills it. But doing this draws out the bigger Grimm that is possessing Weiss. So she's got rid of her Grimm, but now she's tied up and she's at the mercy of the big Grimm, and in a moment that I don't think was built up enough, in that it didn't feel as epic as perhaps it could have, but bang, Silver Eyes, of course it was. We knew it was coming. Anyone who knows this series and also has been paying attention to all of the very obvious clues Osborne has been putting out there, of course it's Silver Eyes that kills this thing, or at least kills most of it, and RWBY shoots it down at the last few shots to end it. Interestingly, and perhaps because she is in a dream, she didn't collapse immediately, or are we just ditching that part? But it doesn't really matter. Anyway, so she uses the Silver Eyes. Actually, wait, we haven't seen RWBY wake up. I hope she wakes up with a killer headache. There you go, that's a note for the end. I hope she wakes up with a massive headache, but we haven't seen it. But anyway, so Weiss is free, but they're still in a dream. The real nightmare leaves her body in the real world and she untraps it. So that one's done. And we do see a faint silver glow under RWBY's blindfold, but the others don't notice it except Osborne. He makes a little comment. So yeah, he got what he wanted. If this is a topic that will be discussed perhaps next episode, we'll see, and if so, that drastically changes the timeline and changes things if RWBY's aware of it, which, how could she not be? She saw it happen, but okay, we have to move on, I guess. Although I will say again, this is where it makes sense that you can use abilities that Weiss didn't know about, otherwise this ability wouldn't be useful. So, yeah. Because it's actually her, she can actually use this ability because it's actually dormant in her, and I guess it wasn't super bright in the real world because it was probably going through closed eyes and a blindfold, and it was probably very faint because it was more being used, mentally, I guess. And I guess we're arguing it's because she wanted to rescue Weiss, because hopefully that trigger should still be in place that it needs something like that. And she wasn't directly looking at Weiss, but that is the whole purpose of this, so anyway, we're getting caught in the weeds, that's what they did. Except now, of course, they're not out of the woods, they're still in the dream, but Blake is running rampant, still gotta beat her, and everything is on fire, and there's more vines. So we go to RWBY and Weiss in a little dream space set aside. Weiss says how alone she was, RWBY asks her to be a friend, the usual. I guess this is our kiss. But either way, our little sweet moment kicks Weiss into her actual dream body, which is, the negative Weiss's outfit. So she's out there with Blake, and she uses her semblance to summon RWBY to her, which again, that's very useful to have. Glad she can do that in the dream. We get a hug, we get a nice little reunion, and they tell Weiss they'll explain later, but Blake's sort of on a rampage, and she unconscious eject a nightmare from him like he was hoping, because it's taken too much of a route. So, we need a climax, so let's do that now. It's Blake versus the others. Yang cracks her mask and it helps snap her out of it a bit, and we get to use the coin. We get this, I think, cool little Full Metal Alchemist reference maybe, with the one Blake being pulled out of the other, like when Hohenheim is pulled out of Father. I think. Anyway, it's a cool moment, you know, one Blake in one outfit being pulled out of the other one. So now it's down to Team RWBY versus this empty, husk, grim version of Blake. So let's do it. So this is kind of what people came to see. It's the big Team RWBY showdown. It's team attacks all around, let the animation go off, lots of semblance usage and shots and all kinds of stuff and, you know, beams going off. And it finishes with Blake stabbing it through the back. And they say, isn't that weird for you? And she went, no, it's not part of me anymore. She metaphorically killed off that side of herself, that Adam influence, all that darkness in her past that she was running from, in a nice moment. So it's dead. And now it's just down to Team RWBY to fight the actual Grimm. It appears in a big seething mass, and in a very odd choice, probably the really odd choice of this episode. They all do individual silhouette slashes at the camera in a thing that does not look good, and what I feel like was meant for an opening sequence more than the show. Like, if this was in the opening titles, and you didn't have context, this is what I would expect, but no, they just sort of slash at the camera in weird silhouette. I don't think it came off how they wanted it to. I'd be interested to see if this is one of those things they fix for later. And otherwise, the animation has been pretty fine this episode, especially compared to the last one, so it's an odd choice, but it's fine. They all do their slashes at the camera, and it really hurts the Grimm. And then RWBY does the same thing, saying, you know, Weiss taught me how to do this. She directs them all to turn around and look at where their shadows have converged, and the nightmare pops up from there, and they all blasted a whole bunch. Basically, the whole team just Robocop it for a second, and it's dead, and it then pops out of real Blake, and she uncaptures it. Blake is saved, all well and good. They made it just in time, of course, right as Jaune semblance runs out. And all those who were worried about Jaune being involved in saving the day, look at it. He didn't get a single hit in against Weiss or Blake, so calm down, it all worked out. He just did a little side thing and he was there and it was all fine. The dream starts getting restored, everyone meets up with a clear mind. Dream Pura and the Weisses and everyone start vanishing. We skip over the explanation, which is good, but we see Weiss have a little breakdown, which is fair. She then gets all back to her normal self and gets embarrassed and flustered and yells and tells everyone off, and it's cute. Says, don't tell anyone about this. Well, too late, everyone already knows, and she's embarrassed. And they use the last coin after Jaune semblance ran out, and I'm not sure if exactly that's how it should work, but okay, not questioning it. They all wake up, cool, back in the real world. But it's nice and everyone is there caring for Weiss, and she's all flustered. And credits. So, that's it. The threat is over. Everyone has killed their Grimms. We've got the little one that was lingering in RWBY. We've got the big one that was in Weiss. We got the new one that was in Blake. Everyone's good. Everyone's clean. We have no time to do another mission, so we have one episode left in 12. And again, it seems like all the fights are done. Maybe they'll have a little sparring or something, but it's not going to be a big fight, so there's nothing really to pull people back in for the episode. At least in a climactic sense. Like, if you're like, oh, I have to find out what happens. Well, we know what happens, but I'm actually very happy with this. As far as, like, bad animation, that was last episode, and they did save it all, so this one looked pretty good. I'm not going to rip it apart and tear up every shot and be like, this one's bad, this one's bad. Overall, I think they did pretty well. They all got their team attacks in, we got the stuff we wanted to see. There was that weird silhouette thing, but mostly it was fine. And yeah, the threat's done with now, and now it's just Fallout. And if you're like me, I'm a big supporter of saving the last episode for falling action, for the downward motion. If you know storytelling, falling action, the bit after the climax, the last thing. Rather than having the big final fight in the last episode, you have it second to last episode and save the last one for, you know, just catching up with everyone dealing with their stuff, having all the conversations they haven't had to have yet, having nice moments, and giving you a conclusion to whatever you're watching, even if it's in a series. Like, even if this does get Volume 2, which it might, I'm still very down for a whole episode here of just detoxing, of just talking it out, of going over the things we've learned and establishing a new relationship between all the girls, because, like, even in actual RWBY, from Volume 1 to Volume 2, there's quite a jump. They're a lot closer in the start of Volume 2 than they were at the end of Volume 1, and you clearly missed some time. I'm fine to see some of what leads to that. That would be cool to see. And also, I am totally down for them to put a cliffhanger here, to put like a tease of something for next volume if there's going to be one. Whether that's introducing Cinder and Emerald and Mercury, whether that's something to do with Penny, whether that's new Grim stuff. If it's something to do with Xion, we haven't got a full wrap-up on Xion. I'm sure that Xion will just sort of leave and it'll be like a bye, Professor. But people have talked about perhaps Xion could be evil, and we get teasers for that maybe Xion orchestrated this to study them. It could be a greater version of this is coming, there's more nightmares coming, could be anything. Who knows, I'm just speculating, but I'm down for them to leave us on a little cliffhanger to be like, if we get a Volume 2, this is the direction we're heading, come back to see it. And hopefully that could drum up some interest in being like, yeah, we want to see Volume 2, which I do, I think this is cool, I'm fine with this. But either way, we've come to the end. Overall, this was the story of Ice Queendom, and I think I will save my final thoughts for next episode too. It sounds like there won't be as much to talk about, or it doesn't feel like there will be, so I'll talk more about the whole wrap-up to the series there, which will be more fitting. So we've come to the end of this one for now, but I really enjoyed this episode as a more actiony episode, and I really enjoyed the little insights we got into Weiss's life and things like that, so I think it overall was pretty good, and definitely a much better pickup from last episode. And yeah, I think they did it justice. I think we brought everything around. There aren't really any lingering threads. There aren't anything that went really unanswered except for, like, I guess the specifics about Jaune's weapon and those things in the dream. But, you know, overall, perfectly fine. And some of that might be addressed next episode anyway. And we'll find out together when we review that. But for now, thank you everyone for joining me. My name is Rigger. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.